On my 30th birthday, my sister stood center stage and handed me an invoice for $28,000, listing every gift our family had ever given me. As everyone applauded my humiliation, they had no idea I was clutching a folder of my own in my pocket. The laughter was loud now, but in 5 minutes, the very people mocking me would be too terrified to even look me in the eye. My name is Francesca Lyons, and if there is one thing I have learned in my 30 years on this earth, it is that nothing in this family comes without a hidden price tag. I stood on the manicured lawn of my parents' house in Maple Ridge, Colorado, holding a glass of sparkling water that I did not want, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking the foundation of my face. It was a perfect Saturday afternoon in late September, the kind where the air is crisp enough to remind you that winter is coming, but the sun is still warm enough to pretend summer has not quite left us. I work as an operations manager for Northline Field Systems. My job is entirely about logistics, efficiency, and predicting points of failure before they happen. I spend my days looking at spreadsheets, analyzing supply chains, and ensuring that every variable is accounted for. I am good at it. I make a stable salary. I max out my 401k, and I pay my credit card bill in full every single month. My life is built on discipline, but standing there in my parents' backyard, surrounded by streamers that were too shiny and floral arrangements that were too expensive, I felt that familiar, sinking sensation of losing control. This party was not my idea. I had specifically told my mother, Diane, that I wanted something low-key, maybe a dinner at that Italian place Evan and I like, or just a quiet evening at home with the kids. But in the Lyons family, requests are merely suggestions that are politely ignored. Mom had turned the backyard into a production set. There was a rented tent with silk drapes, a catered buffet that looked like it cost more than my first car, and a DJ who was currently playing a remix of a pop song that was popular when I was in high school. It was performative. That was the only word for it. It felt less like a celebration of my birth, and more like a stage play where everyone had rehearsed their lines except for me. My husband, Evan, drifted to my side. He is the calmest person I know, a man who moves through the world with a quiet, steady gravity that balances out my anxiety. He placed a hand on the small of my back, a grounding touch. "You okay?" he asked quietly, leaning in so only I could hear him. "You look like you are calculating the escape velocity needed to leave orbit." I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. "I am fine," I said, though my voice sounded tight. "I just do not understand why they did all this. It is too much. Evan, look at this. There are people here I have not spoken to in 5 years." Evan scanned the crowd. Our 2 children, Noah and Mila, were the only ones who seemed genuinely at ease. Noah, who is 9 years old, was chasing his cousin around the oak tree, while 6-year-old Mila was mesmerized by the chocolate fountain, her face already smeared with a bit of evidence. "Just ride it out," Evan said, squeezing my waist. 2 hours. We cut the cake, we smile, we thank them, and then we go home and order pizza. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was just my parents trying to be nice, in their own overwhelming, boundary-stomping way. But I could not shake the feeling that the atmosphere was charged with something else. It was static electricity, invisible but prickly against the skin. My father, Gordon, was standing near the bar, holding a scotch. He was laughing loudly at something a neighbor said. His chest puffed out. Dad has always been a man who prefers the appearance of success over the reality of it. He likes being the host, the patriarch, the man who provides the open bar. He waved at me, a big, sweeping gesture, and I waved back. He looked friendly enough, but there was a glossiness to his eyes, a detachment. He was playing the role of the benevolent father, but he was not really looking at me. He was looking past me, checking the audience reaction. And then there were the guests. I noticed it when I went to the buffet table to get a napkin. My Aunt Sarah stopped talking mid-sentence when I approached. She gave me a smile that was tight and pitiful, the kind of smile you give someone who has just received a bad medical diagnosis but does not know it yet. "Happy birthday, dear," she said, her voice dropping an octave. You look brave? Brave. What a strange word to use for someone turning 30. I thanked her and walked away, but the words stuck in my mind like a burr. I looked around the garden. My cousin Mike was whispering to his wife, looking in my direction. When our eyes met, he quickly looked down at his shoes. "Where is Blair?" I asked Evan, returning to his side. He checked his watch. "She is late. 45 minutes late." Of course she was. My sister, Blair Kincaid, does not simply arrive at events. She makes appearances. Blair is 4 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she has been the sun around which our family's dysfunctional solar system revolves. If I am the operations manager who works in the background, Blair is the lead actress who demands the spotlight. She married a man named Caleb who works in commercial real estate, and she has spent the last decade curating an image of effortless wealth and high status. I checked my phone. No texts. "Everything with Blair is a power play," I muttered. "She is probably sitting in her car around the corner, waiting for the crowd to reach peak capacity so she can walk in and have everyone turn their heads." Evan chuckled, but it was a dry sound. "You know, for a birthday party, people seem really on edge. Have you noticed the way your mom keeps checking the gate?" I had noticed. Mom was vibrating with nervous energy. She kept smoothing her dress, adjusting the silverware, and glancing at the driveway. It was not the anxiety of a hostess worried about the food running out. It was the anxiety of a stage manager waiting for the star to arrive so the main act could begin. Finally, the gate unlatched with a metal clatter that silenced half the conversation in the yard. Blair swept in. She was wearing a dress that was entirely inappropriate for a backyard barbecue, a structured, cream-colored designer piece that probably cost $2,000, paired with stilettos that were already sinking into the soft grass. Her hair was blown out to perfection, her makeup flawless. She looked like she had just stepped out of a magazine editorial about suburban royalty. But it was not her dress that caught my attention. It was what she was carrying. Usually, Blair carries a clutch, or maybe a designer handbag that she holds in the crook of her elbow so everyone can see the logo. Today, she was clutching a folder. It was a thin, rigid document envelope, the kind you see in law offices or corporate boardrooms. It was stark black, and she held it against her side with a grip that turned her knuckles white. The shift in the air was instantaneous. The murmuring conversations died down. It felt scripted. It felt like everyone knew the cue. Blair walked straight toward us. She did not stop to say hello to the guests. She did not stop to hug our parents. Her eyes were locked on me. There was a smile on her face, but it did not reach her eyes. It was a predatory smile, sharp and bright. "Happy birthday, baby sister," she called out. Her voice carried across the yard, projecting to the back row. "Thank you." "Blair," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "You are late." "I wanted to make sure I had everything prepared," she said, stopping 3 feet in front of me. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my simple navy dress. You know how much I love grand gestures. I felt Evan stiffen beside me. He moved slightly, positioning himself half a step in front of me, a subtle shield. He sensed it too. This was not a greeting. This was an approach. Mom and Dad hurried over, flanking Blair like bodyguards. Mom looked flushed, her eyes darting between Blair and me. "Well, everyone is here now," Mom said, her voice too loud, too cheerful. "We can get started." "Started with what?" I asked. "The cake is not out yet." "Oh, we have something better than cake," Blair said. She tapped the black folder with a manicured fingernail. The sound was dry and scratching. I looked at the folder, then at Blair, then at my parents. Dad was studying the bottom of his glass. Mom was smiling that frozen, terrifying smile. "Francesca," Blair said, her voice dropping to a tone of mock sweetness that made my skin crawl. "We have been thinking a lot about your milestones. 30 is a big one. It is the age where you really have to start taking responsibility. Do you not think? The age where you stop being a child and start being an adult." "I am an adult." "Blair," I said, my patience snapping. I have a career. I have a mortgage. I have 2 children. I have been an adult for a long time." Blair laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound that sounded like glass breaking. "Oh, Francesca, you have those things, yes, but have you really paid for them? Or have you just been subsidized?" The word hung in the air. Subsidized. I looked around. The guests had formed a loose circle around us. They were not talking anymore. They were watching. Some of them had their phones out, holding them at chest level, recording. The anticipation in their eyes was hungry. They were not here to celebrate a birthday. They were here for a show. And I realized, with a cold jolt of clarity that started in my stomach and shot up to my throat, that I was the entertainment. I looked at the black folder in Blair's hand again. It was thick. It was heavy. And suddenly, I knew that whatever was inside that folder was designed to hurt. My pulse began to hammer in my ears, a rhythmic thudding that drowned out the distant hum of traffic. I looked at Evan, and for the first time, I saw genuine alarm in his eyes. He reached for my hand, squeezing it hard. "Let's go," Evan whispered. "We do not need to do this." But it was too late. Blair took a step forward, invading my personal space. She held the folder out to me like a weapon. "I think it is time we settle the accounts," she said, her voice ringing clear in the silent yard. "Open it, Francesca. Consider it a gift of truth." I looked at the folder. I looked at my sister's triumphant face, and I knew that my life, the quiet, disciplined life I had built in Maple Ridge, was about to be set on fire. But as I reached out to take the folder, my fingers brushing against the cold cardstock, a strange calm settled over me. Blair thought she was the director of this play. She thought she held all the scripts. But as my hand closed over the folder, I felt the weight of my own pocket, where a much smaller, much denser envelope was resting against my hip. "You want to talk about truth," I thought, staring into Blair's shark-like eyes. "Fine, let's talk about truth." Blair reached over to a passing waiter's tray, grabbed a spoon and a champagne flute, and struck the glass 3 times. The sharp, crystalline chimes cut through the murmur of the crowd like a knife through silk. The backyard fell into a hush that was immediate and total. Even the DJ, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, faded the music down to nothing. "Attention, everyone," Blair announced. Her voice projected with the practiced confidence of someone who is used to commanding boardrooms and brunch tables alike. "Can I have everyone's eyes on the birthday girl, please?" She did not wait for a response. She simply assumed compliance. She turned her body so that she and I were the focal point, a tableau framed by the expensive floral archway my mother had insisted on renting. "We all know Francesca has reached a big milestone today," Blair continued, flashing a smile that showed too many teeth. 30 years old. It is the age where excuses stop, isn't it? It is the age where we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and ask if we are really standing on our own 2 feet, or if we are still leaning on the people who raised us. A few guests chuckled nervously. I saw my neighbor shift his weight, looking uncomfortable, but Blair was just getting warmed up. "You see, Fran," she said, using the nickname I hated, "our family has always been so generous with you. We have supported you. We have lifted you up. Mom and Dad have given you everything, and I think, sometimes, when people receive so much, they forget the value of what they are taking. They start to think it is free." She tapped the black folder in my hands again. "So, for your 30th birthday, I decided to give you the most valuable gift of all, the gift of perspective. Go ahead, open it. Read the first page out loud so everyone can understand just how much love this family has poured into you." I looked at Evan. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle feathering beneath his skin. He looked ready to step in, to grab the folder and throw it into the pool, but I shook my head imperceptibly. If I stopped this now, if I let Evan fight this battle, Blair would win. She would paint me as the weak little sister who needed her husband to save her. I opened the folder. Inside, there was no birthday card. There was no sentiment. There was a single, crisp sheet of heavy bond paper, printed with the formatting of a formal business invoice. At the top, in bold, Sans serif font were the words, "Reimbursement request." My eyes scanned the columns. It was a spreadsheet, a detailed, itemized, chronological spreadsheet. Item 1, ballet lessons, 1998 to 2001, $3,000. Item 2, orthodontic copay, 2003, $2,500. Item 3, used Honda Civic gifted for graduation, 2013, $4,000. Item 4, down payment assistance for wedding venue, 2018, $5,000. The list went on. It covered gas money given to me in college. It covered a grocery run my mother had made for me when I had the flu 4 years ago. It even listed a Christmas gift, a laptop I had received for my 21st birthday, with a note that said, "Depreciation adjusted." I looked at the bottom of the page. The total sum was bolded and underlined twice. $28,450.00. Underneath the total, there was a single line of text. "For all the gifts we ever gave you." "Read it," Blair commanded, her voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "Tell them the number. Francesca." I looked up. 60 pairs of eyes were boring into me. I felt a strange detachment, the kind of cold numbness that takes over when you are in a car accident and time slows down. I was not Francesca the daughter anymore. I was Francesca the operations manager, analyzing a piece of data that was corrupt. $28,000, I said. My voice was steady, surprising even me. "You are billing me for $28,000. A ripple went through the crowd, but it was not a ripple of outrage. It was a ripple of amusement. Someone in the back, I think it was one of Blair's friends from the tennis club, let out a short, sharp laugh. "Well, that is one way to settle the score," the man shouted. Laughter bubbled up. It started in pockets and spread. It was the kind of laughter you hear at a roast, where the cruelty is supposed to be part of the fun. They thought this was a game. They thought this was a witty, eccentric family tradition. My mother, standing to my right, let out a high-pitched giggle. She looked terrified, but her instinct to smooth things over kicked in. "Oh, you know Blair? She always has such a unique sense of humor." My father swirled his scotch, grinning broadly. He slapped Evan on the shoulder. "Better get your checkbook out. Son, looks like you married an expensive one." The laughter grew louder. They were clapping now. A few people were whistling. It was a spectacle. I was the clown in the center of the ring, being pelted with pies, and I was expected to smile and wipe the cream from my face. Blair did not laugh. She watched me with the intense, predatory focus of a hawk. "You have always been the taker, Francesca," she said, loud enough to be heard over the applause. "You took the extra lessons. You took the help with the car. You took the wedding money, and you never once stopped to think that maybe, just maybe, you should pay it back. You act like you are so independent with your little job and your little house, but you are standing on a foundation paid for by Dad and Mom." The words hit me like physical blows. My little job, my little house. I looked at the invoice again. The line item for the wedding venue stung the most. $5,000. I remembered that day. Mom had pressed the check into my hand, tears in her eyes, telling me she wanted to contribute because she was so happy for me. She had called it a blessing. Now, 7 years later, it was a line item on a bill. The laughter began to die down as the guests realized I was not laughing with them. I stood perfectly still, the black folder open in my hands. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not run away. I simply stood there and let the silence expand. Silence is a powerful weapon. Most people cannot handle it. They rush to fill it with noise, with excuses, with nervous energy. But I work in logistics. I know how to wait. The atmosphere shifted from amused to uncomfortable. The clapping faded into scattered coughs and the clinking of ice in glasses. My father's smile faltered. He looked at Blair, then at me, sensing that the joke had perhaps gone on a second too long. Okay, Dad said, his voice booming a little too loudly. "Let's not get too serious now. Who is ready for cake? But before anyone could move, two small figures burst through the wall of adults. Mommy, Mommy. It was Noah and Mila. They had been playing on the other side of the yard, oblivious to the execution squad that had just formed around their mother. They broke into the circle, their faces flushed with excitement. Noah was holding a piece of construction paper folded in half. Mila was clutching a handful of dandelions she had pulled from the edge of the lawn. "We made you cards," Noah shouted, thrusting the paper at me. "I drew a dinosaur because you are old now." Mila hugged my leg, burying her face in my dress. "Happy birthday, Mommy. These are flowers. They are free." The contrast broke my heart. Here were my children, offering me things that had no monetary value but meant everything. And standing above them was my sister, offering me a bill for love I thought I had already earned. I crouched down immediately, turning my back on Blair and the guests. I needed to shield them. I could feel the toxicity radiating from my family like heat from a pavement, and I did not want it to touch my children. "Thank you, my loves," I whispered, taking the card and the weeds. "These are the best gifts I have gotten all day." I kissed Noah on the forehead and smoothed Mila's hair. "Listen to me. I need you to go find Daddy's keys in his bag and go sit in the car for a minute, okay? Daddy is going to come take you for ice cream." "Ice cream?" Noah's eyes went wide. "Now? Right now? Go. Run." I watched them sprint away, weaving through the legs of the adults who had just been laughing at their mother's humiliation. Only when they were safely out of earshot did I stand up again. I turned back to Blair. The smile was gone from her face. She looked annoyed that her moment had been interrupted by children. "Cute," she said, her voice flat. "But you cannot hide behind them, Francesca." "I am not hiding," I said. My voice was low, devoid of emotion. I just did not want them to see their aunt acting like this. Blair's eyes narrowed. "Acting like what? Honest?" "I am just balancing the books, little sister. You have spent 30 years taking. Today is the day you acknowledge that." She took a step closer, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive perfume and white wine. "Today is the day you pay back the family debt," she hissed. "Or are you going to prove me right and walk away without paying your share? Just like you always do." The guests were silent now. They were leaning in, hungry for my reaction. They wanted tears. They wanted a tantrum. They wanted me to rip up the invoice and scream so they could go home and tell their friends about the meltdown at the Lions party. But I was not going to give them that. I looked at the invoice one last time. $28,000. It was a lot of money. To most people, it was a devastating sum. To Blair, it was a power move. But she had made a miscalculation. She assumed she was the only one who kept records. She assumed that because I was quiet, I was not paying attention. She assumed that because I never asked for credit, I did not know the cost of things. I closed the black folder with a soft snap. I looked Blair dead in the eye. "You are right," I said. My voice carried clearly across the silent yard. "We should settle the accounts. It is only fair." I reached into the deep side pocket of my dress. My fingers closed around the thick manila envelope I had carried with me for 3 months, waiting for a moment I hoped would never come. Blair looked at my hand, confused, her brow furrowed. "What is that?" she asked. I pulled the envelope out. It was not sleek and black like hers. It was utilitarian, brown, thick, and it landed on the table beside the birthday cake with a heavy, dull thud that sounded like a gavel coming down. "You brought me a bill," I said, maintaining eye contact. "So I brought you a receipt." The brown envelope sat on the white tablecloth, stark and heavy against the delicate lace. For a moment, nobody moved. The guests were frozen in a tableau of confusion, their wine glasses halfway to their mouths, their eyes darting between Blair's glossy black folder and the battered package I had just placed next to the cake. I saw a flicker of doubt cross Blair's face. It was micro-expression, there and gone in a heartbeat, but I caught it. She shifted her weight, adjusting the strap of her dress. "What is this?" she asked again, her voice losing a fraction of its theatrical projection. Is this some kind of joke, Francesca? Because if you think a few receipts for gas money are going to equate to $28,000, you are embarrassing yourself. I did not answer her immediately. I reached for the clasp of the envelope. The sound of the metal prong bending back was the only noise in the yard. I slid my hand inside and pulled out a bound document. It was housed in a charcoal gray presentation cover, the kind I used for quarterly board reports at Northline. It was professional, unsentimental, and meticulously organized. I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a bridge player laying down a royal flush. I opened the cover and turned the document around so it faced the crowd. I propped it up against the tiered cake stand so everyone could see the summary page. The number was printed in bold, 72-point font. $186,400. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was audible, a sucking in of air that sounded like the room had suddenly lost oxygen. The smirks that had been plastered on the faces of my relatives vanished instantly. The cousin who had shouted about the score being settled earlier choked on his drink. Blair stared at the number. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her eyes widened, trying to process the figure. "What is that?" she whispered. I picked up the document, holding it with steady hands. I turned to the first page of the itemized list. "This," I said, my voice calm and conversational, as if I were discussing the weather, "is a ledger of every single financial transfer, emergency loan, and bill payment I have covered for this family over the last 6 years. Since you want to talk about transaction history, let us talk about it." I scanned the crowd. I made eye contact with my mother, whose face had gone the color of ash. I cleared my throat. Item 1, I read aloud. October 14th, 2019. Recipient: Gordon and Diane Lyons. Purpose: overdue property taxes on the Maple Ridge residence to prevent a county lien. Amount: $12,500. My father stiffened. He looked around wildly, as if looking for an exit. "That was a loan," he sputtered, his voice cracking. "We discussed that. It was a temporary bridge loan until the market turned." "Status," I continued, ignoring him completely, "unpaid, interest accrued, 0. I wrote it off as a gift because I did not want my parents to lose their home. I turned the page. The sound of the paper turning was crisp and loud. Item 2, I read, February 3rd, 2020. Recipient: Blair Kincaid. Purpose: urgent liquidity for the launch of the BK Lifestyle brand. Amount: $15,000. Blair flinched as if I had slapped her. "That was an investment," she snapped, her voice rising to a shriek. "You were supposed to be a silent partner." I looked up from the page, meeting her eyes. "Silent implies equity. Blair," I said softly, "I never received stock. I never received a repayment schedule. I never even received a thank you note. What I received was a text message 3 months later saying the business failed because the market just did not get it." I turned the page again. Item 3, August 2021. Recipient: Gordon Lyons. Purpose: legal fees for undisclosed settlement regarding a traffic incident. Amount: $8,200. Dad knocked his scotch glass over. It shattered on the patio stones, sending amber liquid splashing onto his shoes. He did not move to clean it up. He looked at Mom, who had covered her mouth with her hands. Item 4. I continued, my voice relentless, a metronome of facts. November 2022. Recipient: Blair Kincaid. Purpose: cover for credit card default to avoid notification of spouse. Amount: $22,000. Caleb, Blair's husband, had been standing near the back, looking bored. At the mention of his name, his head snapped up. He stepped forward, pushing through 2 of Blair's friends. "What was that?" Caleb asked. His voice was low, dangerous. "What did you just say?" "Francesca." Blair spun around to face him, her hands fluttering. "Caleb, honey, do not listen to her. She is making things up. She is just trying to ruin my party. I am reading from bank statements. Caleb, I said, lifting the folder so he could see the attached photocopies of the wire transfers. I have the confirmation numbers. I have the dates. I have the text messages from Blair begging me not to tell you because you would cancel the Europe trip if you knew she had maxed out the Amex again. Caleb looked at Blair. His face was unreadable, but the color was draining from his cheeks. You told me you used your bonus for that debt, Caleb said. Blair stammered, her composure fracturing. It was complicated. You do not understand the pressure I was under. I did not let them finish the argument. I turned the page again. Item 5. June 2023. Recipient: Diane Lyons. Purpose: dental surgery and implants. Amount: $18,000. Mom began to cry, not the polite, misty-eyed crying she used to get her way, but ugly, heaving sobs. How could you? She wailed. That was private. That was between a mother and her daughter. You made it public when you applauded Blair for handing me a bill for my own childhood. Mom, I said, you clapped. I saw you. You laughed when she itemized my graduation present. So now we are discussing the reality of who pays for what in this family. I flipped through the remaining pages, the sound echoing like gunshots. $20,000 for the roof repair. Dad claimed insurance covered. $6,000 for Blair's car lease termination. $4,000 for the family vacation I was told was a treat, but ended up on my card at checkout. I closed the folder. The total sum seemed to hang in the air above us, a ghost that refused to vanish. $186,400. I looked at the guests. They were not laughing anymore. They looked sick. They looked like people who had paid for a comedy show and realized they were watching a live autopsy. The judgment they had directed at me 10 minutes ago had boomeranged, and now it was hitting my parents and my sister with the force of a freight train. Blair was shaking. She looked small, diminished, stripped of the glamour she worked so hard to project. Her eyes darted around the yard, seeing the pity and shock on the faces of her friends. She realized she was losing the room. She realized she was losing control. You are petty, she spat, her voice trembling with rage. You kept a list. Who keeps a list like that against their own family? You are a sociopath. Francesca, you sat there for years, pretending to be nice, pretending to help, all while you were tallying it up just to hurt us. I looked at her, and I felt absolutely nothing. The anger I had carried for years, the resentment, the guilt, it was all gone. All that was left was clarity. I did not keep this list to hurt you. Blair, I said, I kept it because I work in operations. I know that in any system, you need data to identify the point of failure. I placed my hand on the charcoal folder, tapping it once. And I realized a long time ago that the failure in this system was not me. I was the patch. I was the backup generator you all ran on while pretending you were self-sufficient. I took a step back, aligning myself with Evan, who was watching me with a look of fierce, protective pride. You wanted to invoice me for raising me. I said to my parents, you wanted to bill me for being your sister. I said to Blair, you put a price tag on our relationship, $28,000. I gestured to my folder. I have paid that bill 6 times over. I picked up Blair's black folder from where I had left it on the table. It felt light, flimsy compared to the weight of the truth I had just dropped. I held it out to her, but she did not take it. She just stared at me, her chest heaving. I dropped her folder on the ground. It landed in the dirt near her expensive heels. If this is a ledger, I said, my voice final and absolute, then we should read the whole thing, and by my calculation, the Lyons family is significantly overdrawn. People often ask how a person lets themselves be drained of nearly $200,000 by the people who are supposed to love them most. They assume it happens all at once, like a robbery. But family theft is rarely that dramatic. It is a slow erosion. It is the steady drip of water that eventually wears through stone. Standing there in the silence of the garden, watching the reality sink into my sister's face, I did not feel like a victor. I felt exhausted. My mind drifted back to where this really began, long before the charcoal folder existed, back to the day I got my first promotion at Northline Field Systems. I was 24 years old. I had just moved into a small apartment with Evan, who was then just my boyfriend. We were eating ramen and sitting on secondhand furniture, but we were happy because we were independent. When I called my parents to tell them I had been made a junior operations manager with a salary that finally pushed us into the middle class, I expected pride. I remember my mother's voice on the phone. She said, "That is wonderful news. Francesca, thank God. Now we do not have to worry about the car insurance this month." That was the first red flag, though I was too young and too desperate for approval to see it. In the Lyons family, I had been assigned a role without ever auditioning for it. Blair was the star. She was the one with the big dreams, the pageants, the fashion school applications, the socialite aspirations. I was the rock, the fixer, the one who was boring but necessary. They called me the responsible one. For years, I wore that title like a badge of honor. I did not realize until much later that in my family, responsible was just a code word for available to pay. The requests started small, $50 here for a grocery run, $100 there because Dad's commission check was late. I paid them because I wanted to be a good daughter. I wanted to show them that I was successful, that I could handle it. It felt good to be the one they turned to. It made me feel seen in a way that my grades or my personality never did. But the dynamic shifted when Blair started her first business, a boutique consulting firm that consisted mostly of her drinking mimosas with other unemployed wealthy wives. She had the image of success down to a science. She drove a leased Range Rover. She wore designer labels. She posted photos of five-star resorts on social media. Behind the scenes, her life was a frantic shuffling of debt. I remember the first time she called me crying. It was 2 a.m. She told me Caleb was going to leave her if he found out she had spent the mortgage money on inventory that never sold. She sounded terrified. She sounded like my big sister who needed me. I transferred $2,000. I told myself it was a loan. I told myself it was a one-time emergency. 2 weeks later, Blair posted a photo of herself at a spa in Aspen with the caption, "Self-care is non-negotiable." I stared at that photo on my phone, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. I was eating leftovers to save money for my own wedding, and my sister was burning my cash on mud baths and champagne. When I asked her about it, she gaslighted me instantly. She told me the trip was a gift from a friend. She told me I was being jealous. She told me I did not understand how networking worked. That was when the resentment began to fester. My mother was the emotional enforcer. Whenever I tried to say no, she would call me with a voice trembling with manufactured fragility. She would say things like, "We are a family. Francesca, family holds each other up. If your sister falls, we all fall. Do you want to be the reason Blair's marriage fails? Do you want to be the reason your father has a heart attack from stress?" She weaponized her own incompetence. She acted as if money was a mysterious force of nature that she had no control over, rather than a resource she and Dad mismanaged chronically. My father was different. He used authority. He treated my contributions not as favors, but as dividends. He was owed for raising me. He would sit me down and talk about legacy and duty. He made me feel like demanding repayment was an insult to his manhood, even as he cashed my checks. It was Evan who finally snapped me out of the trance. We had been married for 2 years. Noah was a baby. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at our bank account, trying to figure out how to pay for daycare because I had just sent $4,000 to cover my parents' credit card bill. Evan sat down across from me. He took the pen out of my hand. "Francesca," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "you are not helping them. You are enabling them." I tried to defend them. I used the scripts my mother had programmed into me. I said they were having a hard time. I said it was just a rough patch. Evan shook his head. "It has been a rough patch for 5 years. Look at this." He pointed to our savings account. It was stagnant. We were working hard. We were saving. But every time we made progress, a Lyons family emergency drained it away. He looked me in the eye and said something that changed everything. He said, You are stealing from our son to pay for your sister's delusions." That sentence hit me harder than any guilt trip my mother could ever manufacture. I looked at Noah sleeping in his swing. I realized that every dollar I gave to Blair to maintain her fake lifestyle was a dollar I was taking away from my own child's future. I was sacrificing my reality to sustain their fantasy. That was the night the charcoal folder was born. I did not start saving receipts because I wanted revenge. I was not planning a grand reveal at a birthday party. I was terrified. I was scared that if I stopped paying, they would turn on me. I knew my family. I knew that the moment I closed the tap, they would rewrite history. They would call me selfish. They would say I abandoned them. They would claim they never asked for that much. I needed proof, not for a judge, but for myself. I needed to know that I was not crazy. So I became the operation manager of my own trauma. Every time they asked for money, I made them send a request in writing. If they called, I sent a follow-up text summarizing the conversation and asking them to confirm. "Hey, Mom, just confirming you need $1,500 for the car repair. Please reply yes." "Hey, Blair, transferring the $3,000 for your credit card. You agreed to pay this back by September, correct?" They found it annoying. They teased me for being so formal. But they were so desperate for the cash that they replied. They created the paper trail themselves, text by text, email by email. I saved everything. I downloaded bank statements. I highlighted the transfers. I printed out the sob stories they sent via email. I kept the receipts from the times I bought groceries because their fridge was empty, only to find bottles of expensive wine in their recycling bin. I organized it all chronologically. I built a case file. Over the last 3 years, the folder grew thicker. It became a heavy physical object that lived in the bottom drawer of my desk. Sometimes, when the gaslighting got bad, when Blair would make a snide comment about my cheap clothes, or Dad would criticize my husband's career, I would take the folder out. I would look at the numbers. Item: $600 for Dad's club membership dues. Item: $1,200 for Mom's impulse furniture purchase. Reading the list grounded me. It reminded me that their criticism was a distraction. It reminded me that the power dynamic they tried to enforce was an illusion. They acted like kings and queens, but they were living on a scholarship funded by the daughter they looked down on. I never wanted to use it. I honestly hoped I would burn it one day. I kept hoping that they would change. I hoped that one day, Blair would say thank you. I hoped that one day, Dad would say he was proud of me without following it up with a request for a loan. But then came the 30th birthday party. When Blair announced the theme of the party, when she made those jokes about me finally becoming an adult, I felt a shift. I knew something was coming. I knew my sister well enough to recognize the setup. She needed to humiliate me to elevate herself. She needed to make me look small so she could feel big. So that morning, before I left the house, I went to my desk. I opened the bottom drawer. I looked at the charcoal folder. Evan watched me from the doorway. He did not stop me. He just asked, "Are you sure?" I ran my thumb over the edge of the papers. I thought about the $28,000 invoice Blair was likely concocting in her head, the petty accounting of a childhood I never asked to pay for. "I am sure," I told him. I put the folder in my pocket not as a sword, but as a shield. I brought it because I knew that today, for the first time in my life, I was going to stop being the daughter who pays. I was going to be the woman who collects. And standing here now, looking at the wreckage of their egos, I realized that Evan was right. I had enabled them for too long. The kindest thing I could do, the only way to truly love them, was to force them to face the truth. Even if the truth cost $186,400. The silence in the backyard was heavy, a physical weight that pressed down on the shoulders of everyone present. The charcoal folder lay on the table like a loaded gun that had just been fired. My sister, Blair, was staring at it, her mouth opening and closing in a fish-like motion, struggling to find the words that would spin this disaster back in her favor. Then, a voice cut through the tension. It was deep, baritone, and utterly devoid of the nervous energy that was vibrating through the rest of the party guests. Excuse me. Heads turned. Near the drink station, a man I had arrived with was standing up. He had spent the last hour quietly nursing a club soda, blending into the background, looking like just another one of Evan's work colleagues. But now, as he stepped forward, the camouflage dropped. He was wearing a suit that was too sharp for a Saturday afternoon barbecue, and his posture was not that of a party guest. It was the posture of a man entering a courtroom. He walked toward us, his dress shoes clicking rhythmically on the patio pavers. He stopped next to me, placing a leather briefcase on the table beside the cake. "Who is this?" my father demanded, finding his voice. "Who invited you?" "I did," I said calmly. The man adjusted his cuffs and looked at my family with a gaze that was polite but predatory. "My name is Harlan Crow," he said. "I am an attorney specializing in forensic accounting and family law. I am here today representing Mrs. Francesca Lyons." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. I heard someone whisper, "A lawyer? She brought a lawyer?" Blair let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "This is ridiculous. You brought a lawyer to a birthday party. Francesca, what is this? Some kind of performance art? You are taking this joke way too far." Harlan did not smile. He did not look at Blair as if she were a person. He looked at her as if she were a defendant. "I assure you, Mrs. Kincaid, my presence here is not a performance," Harlan said. "I have spent the last 72 hours verifying the authenticity of the documents contained in that folder. Every bank transfer, every loan agreement, and every digital communication has been cross-referenced with bank records and notarized affidavits." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a single thin document. "These are not just scribbles in a diary," he continued. "These constitute a documented history of financial transactions totaling $186,400 under Colorado state law, given the nature of the text messages and emails where repayment was explicitly promised. These are not gifts, they are unpaid debts." Blair's face went from pale to a blotchy red. She looked at her husband, Caleb, who was standing frozen near the punch bowl. "Caleb, tell him to leave," Blair snapped. "This is private property." Caleb did not move. He was staring at the charcoal folder on the table. He looked like a man waking up from a long coma into a nightmare. "Is it true?" Caleb asked, his voice rough. Blair's eyes darted between me, the lawyer, and her husband, Caleb. "Baby, do not listen to them. Francesca is just jealous. She is trying to sabotage us. You know how she is." Caleb walked past her. He did not look at her. He walked straight to the table and picked up the charcoal folder. His hands were shaking slightly as he flipped to the page I had read from earlier. "Item 4, Caleb read aloud. "November, 2022, $22,000, credit card default." He looked up at Blair. "That was the month we were approved for the mortgage on the vacation house," he said. "The broker told us we had a clean slate. You told me you paid off the cards with your bonus." "I did?" Blair shrieked, her voice cracking. "I did use my bonus." Harlan Crow stepped in, his voice cutting through her panic like a scalpel. "Actually, Mr. Kincaid, if you look at the appendix on page 14, you will see a copy of the wire transfer from Mrs. Lyons's savings account directly to the creditor. The timestamp is 2 days before your mortgage application was finalized. Without that transfer, your debt-to-income ratio would have disqualified you from the loan." Caleb turned the page. He stared at the proof. The silence that followed was terrifying. It was the sound of a marriage fracturing in real time. "You lied to me," Caleb whispered. "You told me you handled it." "I helped you," Blair cried, grabbing his arm. "I did it for us. I did it so we could get the house." "You did not do it," Caleb said, shaking her off. "Francesca did it, and you just stood here 5 minutes ago and tried to bill her for it." The guests were no longer whispering. They were watching with wide, horrified eyes. This was not just a family spat anymore. This was an exposure. My mother, Diane, finally seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. She rushed forward, wringing her hands, her face wet with tears. "Francesca, please," she begged, reaching for my hand. I pulled back. Stop this. Send this man away. We can talk about this inside. We are a family. You are embarrassing your sister. You are ruining everything. I looked at my mother. For 30 years, her tears had been her greatest weapon. They were the currency she used to buy my silence. But today, looking at her, I felt nothing but a cold, distant pity. I am not ruining anything. Mom, I said, I am just balancing the books. You wanted a public accounting. Here it is. I nodded to Harlan. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out 3 white envelopes. He handed one to Blair, one to my father, and one to my mother. What is this? My father asked, holding the envelope as if it were contaminated. That is a formal notice of demand. Harlan said, it outlines the total amount owed by each party. We are not filing a lawsuit today. However, we are requiring a formal written acknowledgement of the debt and a proposed repayment plan to be submitted to my office within 72 hours. 72 hours, my father sputtered. That is impossible. We do not have that kind of money lying around. Then perhaps you should not have spent it, I said. Blair ripped her envelope open. She scanned the letter, her eyes frantic. You cannot do this, she hissed. You cannot sue your own family. It is sick. No judge will take this seriously. Harlan smiled. It was a cold, professional smile. On the contrary, Mrs. Kincaid, we have text messages where you acknowledge the debt. We have voicemails where you ask for extensions. In the eyes of the law, this is a very straightforward contract dispute. And considering that some of these funds were used to pay off federal tax liens for your parents, I imagine you would not want this to go to a public court record. The IRS tends to frown upon undeclared gifts of that magnitude if they were not reported properly. The mention of the IRS made the color drain from my father's face. He knew exactly what Harlan was talking about. He knew the corners he had cut. The power dynamic in the backyard shifted so violently it was almost palpable. For decades, my parents and Blair had held the high ground. They were the loud ones, the successful ones, the ones who dictated the narrative. I was the quiet, reliable servant. But in 5 minutes, with a few sheets of paper and a man in a gray suit, the hierarchy had been inverted. They were not the patriarch and matriarch anymore. They were debtors, and I was the creditor. Caleb was still reading the folder. He seemed to be cataloging every lie he had been told over the last 5 years. He looked up at me, and his expression was one of profound shame. I did not know. Francesca, he said quietly, I swear to God, I did not know she took money from you. I know you did not. Caleb, I said, Blair is very good at keeping things separate. She likes to keep the image clean while someone else handles the mess. Blair looked around the yard. She saw her friends avoiding her eyes. She saw the judgment. She saw the ruin of the reputation she had spent her entire adult life building. Get out, she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. Get out of my parents' house. Take your lawyer and get out. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at her. We are leaving, I said. I have said what I needed to say. I turned to Evan. He was standing there, his hand resting on the back of my chair, looking at me with a mixture of awe and relief. He knew how hard this was for me. He knew how many nights I had cried over these people. Let's get the kids, I said to him. Evan nodded and went toward the house to retrieve Noah and Mila. I turned back to my family one last time. My father was staring at the ground, defeated. My mother was sobbing into a napkin. Blair was standing alone, clutching the demand letter, while her husband stood 10 feet away from her, looking at her like she was a stranger. You have 72 hours, I said. The number is on the letterhead. Do not call me. Call Harlan. I walked away. The silence followed me all the way to the gate. I could feel their eyes on my back, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel the urge to turn around and fix it. I did not feel the need to apologize. I did not feel the heavy, crushing weight of obligation. I walked past the expensive floral arrangements. I walked past the rented tent. I walked past the DJ who was awkwardly packing up his equipment. When I reached the driveway, Evan was buckling the kids into their car seats. Noah looked up at me. Did you get your presents? "Mommy?" he asked. I looked back at the house, where the party was dissolving into chaos. "Yes, baby," I said. Climbing into the passenger seat, I got exactly what I wanted. I closed the car door, shutting out the noise of my family's implosion. As Evan started the engine and we pulled away from the curb, I checked the time on the dashboard. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. My 30s had officially begun, and as we drove down the tree-lined street of Maple Ridge, leaving the toxicity in the rearview mirror, I realized that for the first time in 30 years, I was actually free. But I also knew this was not the end. The Lyons family did not give up power easily. They were stunned now, shocked by the blitzkrieg of truth I had launched. But shock wears off, and when it does, it is usually replaced by rage. I looked at my phone. I had already blocked their numbers, just as Harlan had advised. But I knew the storm was coming. I could feel it in the air. Evan reached over and took my hand. "You okay?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "I am better than okay," I said, "but brace yourself. They are going to come back hard." Evan squeezed my hand. "Let them come. We have the receipts." I watched the house disappear around the bend. I knew he was right. I had the receipts. But I also knew that people like Blair and my parents did not care about facts. They cared about winning, and they would burn everything down before they let me walk away with the victory. The 72-hour clock had started ticking, and I had a feeling that the next 3 days were going to be the longest of my life. We pulled into our driveway at 3:45 in the afternoon. The house looked exactly as we had left it 2 hours ago. The sprinklers were hissing rhythmically on the front lawn. The porch light was off, and the recycling bin was still at the curb. It was a picture of suburban normalcy, a stark contrast to the demolition site we had just left behind at my parents' estate. I unbuckled my seatbelt. My hands were steady. I checked my reflection in the rear-view mirror. My mascara was intact. My eyes were clear. There was no redness, no puffiness. I had made a promise to myself in the car that I would not shed a single tear in front of Noah and Mila. Tears imply sadness or regret, and I felt neither. I was in execution mode. The emotional part of the day was over. The administrative part had just begun. Evan opened the back door to get Mila out of her car seat. He looked at me over the roof of the car. "You take the office," he said, his voice low. "I will take the living room. Pizza and cartoons protocol." I nodded. Protocol. That was how we handled crises at Northline Field Systems. We established a protocol, and we followed it until the situation was stabilized. I walked into the house, kicked off my heels by the door, and went straight to my home office. I did not change out of my navy dress. I did not get a glass of water. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, woke up my computer, and logged into my password manager. The screen glowed with the familiar blue light. This was my domain. This was where I had control. For years, my financial life had been a tangled web of obligations and permissions that allowed my family to siphon money from me with the ease of a recurring subscription. Today, I was canceling the subscription. I opened the banking portal for our primary checking account. I navigated to the tab labeled Recurring Transfers. The list was longer than I liked to admit. First on the list, CenturyLink AutoPay. This was for my parents' landline and internet. They had claimed 3 years ago that the bill was too complicated to set up online, so I had done it for them on my account. They were supposed to send me a check every month. They had sent exactly 4 checks in 36 months. I clicked the small trash can icon next to the payee name. "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment?" the system asked. I clicked yes. Payment canceled. Effective immediately. Next, AT&T Family Plan. I had put Blair on my phone plan 6 years ago when she was between jobs. She had promised to switch to her own plan as soon as she got settled. She never did. She had the latest iPhone, fully financed, and the unlimited data package, all billed to Francesca Lyons. I opened a separate tab for the mobile carrier. I selected Blair's line. I selected the option Release Liability. The system prompted me to enter the email address of the person assuming responsibility for the line. I typed in Blair's personal email address. She would get a notification in 5 minutes. If she did not accept the transfer of billing responsibility within 48 hours, the line would be suspended. I did not hesitate. I clicked submit. Then I went to the streaming services: Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, Disney Plus. I checked the device login history. There were logins from my parents' iPad, logins from Blair's smart TV, logins from Caleb's laptop. I went to the account settings for each service, sign out of all devices. Then I changed the password to a randomly generated string of 20 characters that looked like someone had smashed their face against the keyboard. If they wanted to watch a movie tonight to distract themselves from the legal notice they had just received, they were going to have to enter their own credit card information. I moved on to the banking apps. There was one account that made my stomach tighten. It was a legacy joint checking account I had opened with my mother when I was 18. It was the account I used in college. I had stopped using it years ago, but my name was still on it, which meant I was legally liable if she overdrew it. And Mom loved to overdraft. I logged in. The balance was $42.16. I looked at the transaction history. It was a stream of small, sad purchases: gas station snacks, QVC purchases, a liquor store charge from yesterday. I initiated a transfer of $42.16 to my external savings account. Then I navigated to the close account feature. Most banks make you go into a branch to close a joint account, but because the balance was now zero and I was a primary account holder, the system allowed me to request closure online. Reason for closing account? The drop-down menu asked. I scrolled past fees too high and switching banks. I selected Other in the text box. I typed 2 words: risk management. I clicked confirm. I sat back in my chair. The room was silent except for the hum of the computer tower and the faint sound of a cartoon explosion coming from the living room. I was not done. I opened my email. I created a filter rule. Any email from my father's address, any email from my mother's address, any email from Blair, any email from Caleb. Action: skip inbox, mark as read, move to folder, legal evidence. I did not want to see their excuses. I did not want to read their guilt trips on Monday morning when I opened my laptop to work. I wanted their words to go straight into a digital vault where only my lawyer would look at them. Then I picked up my phone. It was already buzzing. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, a string of text messages from Blair that I could see previewed on the lock screen. "You are a bitch, Francesca. I cannot believe you. Pick up the phone right now, young lady. We are family. You cannot do this." I did not unlock the phone to read them. I went to settings. I tapped block caller for Mom. I tapped block caller for Dad. I tapped block caller for Blair. I hesitated on Caleb. He was an innocent bystander in this, caught in the crossfire, but he was still on the other side of the line. Information I gave him would flow back to Blair. I blocked Caleb too. Finally, I opened the group chat, the Lyons family group chat. It had been silent all day, ever since the party started. I typed a single message. I kept it clinical. I stripped it of any adjectives or emotion. Effective immediately. All financial ties between us have been severed. Do not attempt to contact me, Evan, or the children. All future communication regarding the repayment of the $186,000 debt must be directed to Harlan Crow's office. He has full authority to negotiate on my behalf. If you show up at my home or my place of work, I will contact the police and file for a restraining order. This is not a negotiation. I hit send. Then I tapped the leave conversation button. Delete conversation? Yes. The chat vanished from my screen. I put the phone down on the desk, face down. I let out a breath. It was a long, slow exhale that felt like it was emptying my lungs of 30 years of bad air. My hands were still steady, but my fingertips felt cold. It was the adrenaline crash. My body was realizing that the threat was gone, but the combat readiness was still active. The door to the office creaked open. I spun around in my chair. It was Evan. He was holding 2 mugs of tea. Steam was rising from them in the dim light of the hallway. "Everything okay in the war room?" he asked gently. I nodded. It is done. I cut them off. Everything. The phone plan. The streaming. The joint account. I blocked their numbers. Evan walked over and placed the mug on a coaster beside my keyboard. He looked at the black screen of my phone. Did they try to call? He asked. They tried. I said. I did not answer. Evan pulled up a spare chair and sat next to me. He did not touch me immediately. He just sat there, occupying the space, letting his presence be a solid wall against the chaos I had just shut out. You know, he said after a moment, when you were reading that list in the backyard, I have never been more attracted to you. I let out a laugh. It was a dry, startled sound. Really. I was terrified I looked like a monster. Evan shook his head. You look like someone who finally realized her own worth. You look like the woman I married, but with the volume turned up. He reached out and took my hand. His palm was warm. How do you feel? He asked. I looked at the computer screen, at the rows of canceled and blocked notifications. I feel light, I said, and that is the scary part. I should feel sad. Shouldn't I? They are my parents. Blair is my sister. I just initiated a legal war against them. I should be crying. You are not crying because you have already mourned them, Evan said. You mourned the family you wanted years ago. Today was just the funeral for the family you actually have. He was right. I had spent years grieving the relationship I wished I had. I had grieved every time Mom forgot my birthday because she was busy with Blair's drama. I had grieved every time Dad asked for a loan instead of asking how my job was. I had done my crying in the shower, in the car, in the quiet moments when I thought nobody was looking. Today was just paperwork. I picked up the tea. It was Earl Grey, exactly how I liked it, with a splash of oat milk. What are the kids doing? I asked. Watching a movie about talking dogs, Evan said. They asked if we could have ice cream for dinner. I told them that under the circumstances, ice cream is an acceptable nutritional choice. I smiled, a real smile this time. Can we turn off the porch lights tonight? I asked, just in case they decide to drive over. Evan nodded. I already locked the gate, and I parked my truck at the end of the driveway so nobody can pull in. If they come, they have to park on the street, and we will see them coming from a mile away. He had thought of everything. He was my partner in every sense of the word. I stood up. My legs felt a little shaky, but strong enough to hold me. Come on, I said. Let's go eat ice cream with our children. I shut down the computer. The screen went black, erasing the evidence of the digital surgery I had just performed. The room plunged into shadow. As we walked out of the office, I closed the door firmly behind me. I heard the latch click. It was a sharp, final sound. The house was quiet. It was not the tense, loaded silence of my parents' home, where every lack of noise was just a breath held before an explosion. This was a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a sanctuary that had been secured. I walked into the living room. Noah and Mila were curled up on the rug, bathed in the glow of the television. They looked up when I entered. Mommy, look, Noah pointed at the screen. The dog is driving the car. I sat down on the floor between them. Mila immediately crawled into my lap, resting her sticky cheek against my chest. I wrapped my arms around her. I could feel her small heart beating against mine, steady and unburdened. This is what I am protecting, I thought. I looked at Evan, who was settling onto the sofa behind us. He gave me a thumbs up. My phone was in the other room, probably lighting up with the rage of a family that had lost its host organism. But in here, in this circle of light on the living room rug, nothing could touch us. I had drawn the line in the sand. It was $28,000 wide and 30 years deep, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would never cross it again. The 72-hour deadline I had given my family was not just a legal window, it was a pressure cooker, and as Sunday morning broke over Maple Ridge, the lid blew off. I woke up to a silence that felt suspicious. My phone, which I had left in the kitchen overnight, was not ringing, but when I picked it up and unlocked the screen, I realized the silence was an illusion created by the block feature. The notifications tab told a different story. 34 blocked calls, 14 blocked voicemails, 27 text messages from numbers I did not recognize, presumably friends of the family or burner phones. I sat at the kitchen island, a cup of coffee steaming in my hands, and Evan sat opposite me. He looked tired. "Do you want to listen to them?" he asked. I shook my head initially, but I knew I had to. Harlan Crow, my attorney, had instructed me to document everything. Harassment was evidence. I put the phone on speaker and tapped the first voicemail. It was my mother. Her voice was not angry. It was worse. It was dripping with a cloying, terrified sweetness, the kind of tone one uses to talk a jumper off a ledge. "Francesca, honey, please pick up. We are so worried about you. We know you are not yourself right now. We know this is not you talking. It is the stress, isn't it? Or maybe it is. Well, we just want to make sure you are safe. Call Mommy. We can fix this. We can forgive you for the scene yesterday. Just come home." I felt a surge of nausea. "We can forgive you," as if I were the one who had sinned, as if presenting a factual accounting of theft was an act of aggression that required absolution. I played the next one. It was my father. "This has gone far enough. Francesca, you are embarrassing the family name. I do not know what kind of poison that lawyer put in your head, or what Evan is whispering to you, but you need to snap out of it. You are destroying your sister's reputation. Over money? Filthy money? I thought we raised you better than to be a miser. Call me. Now." I deleted nothing. I forwarded every audio file to Harlan's secure server. "They are shifting the narrative." I told Evan, keeping my voice flat. "They are not addressing the debt. They are addressing my mental state. They are trying to make it look like I am having a breakdown so they can invalidate the contracts." Evan took a sip of his coffee. "And they are blaming me. Did you hear that part?" I had heard it. It was a classic tactic. In the Leon's family mythology, Francesca the peacekeeper does not have a spine. Therefore, if Francesca stands up for herself, she must be being manipulated by a controlling husband. It was easier for them to villainize Evan than to admit they had abused my generosity for a decade. By noon, the private harassment had spilled into the public square. I received a notification from a cousin I rarely spoke to, a woman named Sarah who lived in Ohio. She had tagged me in a post. I opened the social media app. My stomach dropped. Blair had gone nuclear. She had posted a photo of herself and our parents, smiling at some gala from 3 years ago. They looked happy, wealthy, and united. The caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive fiction. "Heartbroken today. It is so painful when you realize that people you welcomed into your soul only care about transactional relationships. Some people think family is a ledger to be balanced. They keep score instead of keeping love. We are praying for my little sister as she navigates this dark time and the toxic influences in her life. We hope she finds her way back to the light. We forgive you. Fran, the door is always open when you are ready to apologize." It was brilliant. It was evil. She did not mention the $28,000 invoice she had handed me. She did not mention the $186,000 she owed me. She framed herself as the benevolent, forgiving sister and me as the cold, money-hungry traitor who had lost her way. I scrolled down to the comments. "Stay strong. Blair, toxic people have no place in your vibe. Sending prayers for your sister. Hope she gets the help she needs. Money changes people. So sad she chose cash over blood." It was a firing squad. People I had known since high school, neighbors I waved to, distant relatives who had no idea what was actually happening. They were all piling on. They were validating Blair's victimhood. My hand hovered over the reply button. I wanted to scream. I wanted to upload the PDF of the bank transfers. I wanted to post the screenshot of the text message where Blair begged me for $5,000 to cover a gambling debt. I wanted to burn her meticulously curated reputation to the ground with the truth. Evan's hand covered mine. He gently pulled the phone away. "Don't," he said. "They are lying." "Evan," I said, my voice shaking. "Look at this. They are making me look like a monster." "That is exactly what they want," Evan said. "They want you to engage. If you comment, you look defensive. You look like you are fighting in the mud. Blair is a pig, Francesca. She likes the mud. You do not belong there. He was right. Engaging was a trap. If I argued, I became the crazy sister. If I stayed silent, I let the lie stand. It felt like there was no winning move. But I remembered what Harlan had said. The court of public opinion does not sign checks. The court of law does. I took a screenshot of the post. I took screenshots of the comments from my aunts and uncles who were piling on. I sent them all to Harlan with a note. Defamation of character? An hour later, my phone pinged with a direct message. It was from my cousin Mike. He was the one who had looked down at his shoes during the party, the one who had seemed ashamed when the laughter started. Mike was quiet. He worked in IT and generally stayed out of the family drama. Hey, Fran, the message read, I know you are probably not reading these, but I thought you should see this. I am sorry I did not say anything yesterday. I was a coward. This is from the cousins group chat. Blair created a new one without you this morning. Attached was a series of screenshots. I opened them. The conversation was timestamped from 2 hours ago. Blair. She is bluffing. I talked to a friend who knows about law. She cannot prove half those transfers were loans. We just have to hold the line. If we all say they were gifts, it is her word against ours. 3 against 1. Mom, I am just so worried Caleb will leave her. Francesca is ruining her sister's marriage on purpose. She has always been jealous of Blair. Dad, I am going to call her boss at Northline tomorrow. Maybe if her job is on the line, she will drop this nonsense. I will tell them she is unstable. I stared at the screen. The blood drained from my face, leaving me cold and numb. My father was planning to call my employer. He was willing to jeopardize my career, the very source of the money he had leached off of for years, just to force me into submission. He was not just angry, he was willing to destroy my livelihood to protect his ego. And my mother, accusing me of jealousy, after I had paid for her teeth, after I had saved her house? I looked at Evan. They are plotting to lie under oath, I said, showing him the screen. Blair is coaching them to commit perjury, and Dad wants to get me fired. Evan's face hardened, his jaw set in a line of granite. Send that to Harlan, he said, right now. That is conspiracy. And that threat about your job? That is actionable. I forwarded the screenshots. My phone rang almost immediately. It was Harlan. I answered on the first ring. I have the screenshots. Mrs. Lyons, Harlan said. His voice was brisk, energized. This is a gift. They just admitted to a coordinated effort to defraud you and destroy your reputation. What do I do? I asked. You do absolutely nothing, Harlan said. You let them dig. Every post Blair makes, every lie they tell in that group chat is another nail in the coffin of their defense. I am drafting a cease and desist letter regarding the defamation and the threat to your employment. I will have a courier deliver it to your father's house within the hour. Can they really get me fired? I asked. My voice was small. No, Harlan said firmly. I will contact Northline's legal department myself as a preemptive measure. I will explain that you are in the midst of a family legal dispute and that any communication from your father is harassment. Companies hate drama, Francesca, but they hate lawsuits more. If your father tries to interfere with your employment, we will sue him for tortious interference so fast his head will spin. I hung up. The afternoon dragged on. The social pressure was relentless. My phone kept lighting up with notifications from the flying monkeys, the term Evan used for the relatives my mother had deployed to do her bidding. Aunt Sarah sent a long, rambling text about how blood is thicker than water and you only get one mother. My Uncle Bob sent a message saying, Your father is a proud man. Do not humiliate him like this. They were all reading from the same script. None of them asked if I was okay. None of them asked why I had done it. They only cared that I had broken the code of silence. They were angry because I had stopped playing my role. I was the designated shock absorber of the family. I was supposed to absorb the dysfunction so they could all pretend everything was smooth. By stepping out of the way, I had let them crash, and they hated me for it. I sat on the couch, watching my children play with their Legos. Noah was building a fortress. He was building walls thick enough to keep the bad guys out. I felt a profound sense of loneliness. It was a specific kind of grief. I was not missing my parents. I was missing the people I wished they were. I was missing the fantasy of a family that would rally around me, not against me. Evan sat down beside me. He had made dinner, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, comfort food. "Do not look at the phone," he said. "I cannot help it," I whispered. "It hurts. Evan, it physically hurts. They are all turning on me, even the ones I thought were neutral." "That is because neutral people prefer the status quo," Evan said. "You disrupted the system. Systems fight back to survive." He handed me a sandwich. "Eat," he commanded gently. "You need strength. Tomorrow is Monday. The 72 hours are ticking down." I took a bite. It tasted like cardboard. My throat was tight. I realized then that the money was not the point anymore. The $186,000 was just a number. The real cost was this. The real cost was seeing the absolute moral bankruptcy of the people who raised me. I checked the group chat screenshots one last time. "Blair, just keep posting nice things about family. Make her look like the aggressor. We will win the PR war." I put the phone down. I did not respond. I did not post a defense. I did not like or comment on the few messages of support I received from my own friends. I went dark. I understood now that any reaction was fuel for them. They fed on drama. They fed on the back and forth. By denying them a response, I was starving them. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the driveway. Let them post. I thought, let them lie. Let them rally the troops and circle the wagons. I had the receipts. I had the law. And thanks to Cousin Mike, I now had their war plans. I went back to the computer in my office and opened a new folder. I named it Part 7, The Smear Campaign. I dragged the screenshots into the folder. I dragged the audio files of the voicemails. Then I closed the laptop. I was done being the victim. I was done being the daughter. I was the plaintiff, and I was ready for war. On Monday morning, just after 10 o'clock, my office phone rang. It was not a number I recognized, but the area code was local. I hesitated. My personal cell phone was still a war zone of blocked notifications and desperate voicemails from my parents, but my work line was supposed to be a sanctuary. I picked it up. "This is Francesca," I said, keeping my voice professional. There was a pause on the other end, a long, heavy breath. "Fran, it is Caleb." I stiffened. I had blocked his cell number, but I had forgotten that he had a direct line from his real estate firm. I moved my finger toward the disconnect button. "I cannot talk to you." "Caleb," I said, "my lawyer has been very clear. If you want to discuss the debt, you need to call Harlan." "Please," he said. His voice sounded wrecked, cracked around the edges like old pavement. "I am not calling about the money. I am not calling for Blair. I am sitting in my car in the parking lot of your building." I stood up and walked to the window of my second-floor office. Sure enough, Caleb's silver sedan was parked in the visitor row, isolated from the other cars. "I just need to see the papers." "Fran," he said, "not the demand letter. The backup. The proof. Blair spent the whole weekend telling me you forged everything. She says you are jealous of our success. She says you made up the bank transfers on Photoshop." I watched his car. I could see his silhouette in the driver's seat, his head resting against the steering wheel. "I did not forge anything," I said. "Then show me," he pleaded. 5 minutes. I need to know if I am married to a liar, or if I am the crazy one. Please." I considered it. Harlan would probably advise against it. He would say that any interaction without counsel was a risk. But this was not a legal maneuver. This was Caleb. He was not a bad man. He was just a man who had fallen in love with a mirage. And if I wanted to dismantle Blair's defense, the fastest way to do it was not through a judge, but through the husband who bankrolled her lifestyle. "Meet me at the coffee shop on 3rd Avenue in 10 minutes, I said. "Do not come up to the office." I hung up. I went to my filing cabinet. I did not take the whole charcoal folder. That was too bulky, too emotional. Instead, I pulled out a specific subfile I had compiled over the weekend. I had labeled it simply, the Kincaid account. I walked to the coffee shop with the folder tucked under my arm. The air was cool, biting. Inside the cafe, it smelled of roasted beans and damp coats. I found a booth in the back corner, away from the windows. Caleb walked in 2 minutes later. He looked terrible. He was usually impeccable. Pressed suits, gelled hair, the picture of a successful realtor. Today, he was wearing a wrinkled polo shirt and jeans. He looked like he had not slept in 48 hours. His eyes were bloodshot. He sat down opposite me. He did not order a coffee. He just stared at the folder on the table. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. I did not offer pleasantries. I pushed the folder across the table. "You asked for proof," I said. "Here it is. This file contains only the transactions that directly relate to your household, your mortgage, and your joint debts." Caleb opened the folder. His hands were shaking so badly that the paper rattled as he turned the first page. He stared at the first document. It was a printout of an email chain from 3 years ago. "Read the header," I said. He read it aloud, his voice a whisper. From Blair Kincaid to Francesca Lyons. Subject, emergency. Date, April 4th, 2022. He read the body of the email. "Caleb thinks the bonus check cleared, but I spent it on the deposit for the BMW. You have to loan me $4,000 just for 2 weeks until I can move money around. If the check bounces, he will check the accounts." Caleb looked up at me. His face was gray. "I remember this," he said. "The dealership called and said there was an issue with the transfer. She told me it was a bank error. She made a huge scene on the phone with them." "It was not a bank error," I said. "She was overdrawn. I wired the money to her personal account 10 minutes after she sent that email. Look at the next page." He turned the page. There was the bank confirmation. $4,000. Transfer successful. Caleb swallowed hard. He kept turning pages. He saw the loan for the credit card consolidation. He saw the money for the business trip to Miami that was actually a girls' weekend at a luxury resort. He saw the $2,000 for the private school application fees that she claimed the school had waived because of their status. But the real blow came halfway through the stack. I watched his eyes stop on a document that was photocopied on yellow paper. "What is this?" he asked. It was a promissory note, a handwritten agreement from 2 years ago. Borrowing $15,000 from my parents, money that I had given my parents the day before. But that was not the important part. "Look at the witness signature," I said. Caleb squinted at the bottom of the page. It was signed Diane Lyons. "And look at the note next to it," I added. Caleb read the handwriting in the margin. It was my mother's distinct, looping script. "Do not worry, sweetie. We will not let Caleb find out about the credit line. Just pay it back when you can." Caleb dropped the paper as if it burned his fingers. "My mother-in-law," he whispered. "She knew. They all knew." "Caleb," I said. My voice was gentle but unyielding. "Mom knew Blair was drowning in debt. Dad knew. They helped her hide it from you because they needed you to believe the lie. They needed you to keep paying the mortgage on the big house so they could brag about how successful their daughter was." Caleb ran a hand through his hair. He looked like a man whose entire reality was dissolving. "I sat at dinner with them every Sunday," he said. "I paid for the steaks. I paid for the wine. And they sat there, smiling at me, knowing that my wife was borrowing money from her little sister to cover the tracks of the money she was stealing from us. It is financial infidelity. Caleb," I said, "and my parents are co-conspirators." He looked at me with a sudden, sharp intensity. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you pay it? Fran, why did you give it to her?" I looked out the window at the passing traffic. "Because I was trained to," I said, "because every time I tried to say no, Mom would call me crying. She would tell me that you were going to leave Blair if you found out. She told me that if Blair's marriage failed, it would destroy the family. I paid to keep your marriage together. Caleb, I paid to keep the peace." Caleb laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound. So I am the charity case, he said. I walked around thinking I was the provider. I thought I was taking care of everyone. But really, my sister-in-law was subsidizing my wife's lies so I wouldn't pack my bags. He closed the folder. He placed his hand on top of it, pressing down hard. How much is the total? He asked. For the items involving you? I asked. About $45,000. The rest of the $186,000 includes money given directly to Mom and Dad, and personal debts of Blair's before you got married. $45,000, he repeated. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He unscrewed a pen. I put my hand over his. No, Caleb. He looked up, confused. I have to pay you. It is my debt. If she spent it on our house, on our cars, that is on me. I am the husband. I shook my head. I did not come here for a check. I said, I came here because you deserve to know the truth. You are not the one who manipulated me. You are not the one calling me a liar on Facebook. I took the checkbook from his hand and closed it. If you write me a check now, Blair wins. I told him. She will say it was just a misunderstanding. She will say you handled it because you are such a good provider. She will learn nothing. She will just find a new way to hide the next bill. Caleb stared at me. He looked lost. Then what do you want? I want you to see her. I said, I want you to really see her. And I want you to stop letting them use you as a shield. Caleb looked down at the folder again. He traced the edge of the yellow paper where my mother's note was written. She posted a picture of us this morning, he said quietly. Blair. She put it on Instagram. Caption was, United We Stand. She tagged you. I know. I said. She asked me to comment on it. He continued. She wanted me to write that we support her. She said if we present a united front, you will back down. She said you are weak. Fran. She said you always fold if people yell loud enough. I smiled. It was a thin, cold smile. She is operating on old data. I said, the Francesca she knew does not exist anymore. Caleb nodded slowly. He picked up the folder. Can I keep this? He asked. It is a copy. I said, the originals are in a safe deposit box. Harlan has digital backups. Good, Caleb said. He stood up. He looked older than he had 10 minutes ago. The jaunty confidence of the successful salesman was gone, replaced by the heavy, grim determination of a man who has to go home and burn his life down. I am going to go home, he said. What are you going to do? I asked. He looked at the door. I am going to ask her about the BMW deposit, he said, and then I am going to ask her about the signature, and then. He trailed off. He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. I stood up too. Good luck, Caleb, I said. He looked at me one last time. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound sadness. I am sorry. Fran, he said, I am sorry nobody protected you. He turned and walked out of the coffee shop. I watched him go. He walked with his head down, clutching the file against his chest like it was a holy text. I sat back down in the booth. I took a sip of water. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from my bank app. Recurring transfer canceled. Another tie severed. I knew what was happening now. Caleb was driving back to the pristine house in the expensive subdivision. He was walking into the lion's den, but this time, he was armed. Blair was probably sitting in her kitchen, scrolling through the comments on her post, feeling smug. She probably thought she had weathered the storm. She probably thought that with Mom and Dad on her side, and Caleb kept in the dark, she could wait me out. She had no idea that the call was coming from inside the house. I checked my watch. It was almost noon. The 72-hour deadline expired tomorrow at 3 o'clock. But looking at the empty seat where Caleb had just been sitting, I knew the timeline had just accelerated. Blair Kincaid had built a castle out of other people's money and other people's lies. She had fortified it with guilt and defended it with gaslighting. But she had made one fatal mistake. She had forgotten that every castle needs a foundation, and her foundation, her husband, his income, his trust, had just walked out of a coffee shop with the blueprints of her deception tucked under his arm. I picked up my purse and walked out into the sunshine. I had work to do, and for the first time in years, I did not feel the heavy weight of impending doom. I felt the light, terrifying freedom of the truth. The first domino had fallen, the rest was just gravity. Tuesday morning arrived with the heavy, suffocating pressure of a storm front moving in over the mountains. The 72-hour deadline I had issued in the demand letter was set to expire at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I sat in my office at Northline, staring at the clock on the wall, watching the second hand sweep past the 12. I expected silence, or perhaps, if I was optimistic, a capitulation, a quiet email from a lawyer representing Blair, asking for a payment plan. Instead, at 10:30, Harlan Crow called. "Francesca, are you sitting down?" he asked. His voice was not alarmed, but it carried a sharp, metallic edge that I had not heard before. It was the tone of a hunter who just realized the prey is armed. "I am sitting," I said. "Did they pay?" "No," Harlan said. "They did not pay. They filed." I frowned, gripping the phone tighter. "Filed what?" "A lawsuit." "Not exactly," Harlan said. "Your sister filed an emergency petition for mediation with the county clerk, citing familial harassment and emotional distress. But that is not the interesting part. She attached exhibits to her filing. Francesca, she has submitted documents claiming that the $186,000 were formally designated as gifts." My blood ran cold. "That is a lie," I said. "We have the texts. We have the emails where she begs for loans." "I know," Harlan said, "but she has produced a document. It is a deed of gift dated February 3rd, 2020. It explicitly states that the $15,000 for her business launch was a non-reimbursable contribution. And Francesca? It has your signature on it." The room seemed to tilt. I felt a wave of dizziness. "I never signed that," I whispered. "I never signed anything like that." "I need you in my office immediately," Harlan said. "Bring Evan, and bring the original sympathy card you sent to your grandfather's funeral if you have a copy, or any handwritten correspondence you sent your parents around 2019. "Why?" I asked, my brain struggling to catch up. "Because," Harlan said, his voice dropping to a growl, "I think your sister just made a mistake that is going to send her to prison." Harlan's office was in downtown Denver, a glass-walled fortress that smelled of leather and expensive coffee. When Evan and I arrived, Harlan was already standing at a large conference table covered in papers. He had a magnifying glass in one hand and a tablet in the other. He did not waste time with greetings. He pointed to a document in the center of the table. "Is this your signature?" he asked. I looked down. It was a photocopy of a document titled Affidavit of Gift. The paper looked official. The legalese was dense, and there, at the bottom, above the line labeled donor, was my name, Francesca Lyons. I traced the ink with my eyes, the loop of the F, the sharp slant of the L. It looked like my handwriting. It looked exactly like my handwriting. I felt a surge of panic. Had I signed this? Had I been so desperate for their approval years ago that I signed a waiver and forgot about it? I looked at Evan. He looked terrified. I do not remember this. I stammered, "But it looks like mine." Harlan nodded. "It looks like yours because it is yours. But you did not sign this document." He tapped the tablet screen. He brought up a digital overlay. On the left was the signature from the gift affidavit. On the right was a scan of another document. "This scan on the right," Harlan said, "is from the sympathy card you sent your parents when your grandmother passed away in 2019. Your mother kept it. She probably has a whole box of your cards." He slid the digital images over each other. They matched perfectly. Not just the shape, but the pixelated bleed of the ink. "It is a trace," Harlan said, his voice cold and precise, or more likely, a digital lift. Someone scanned your signature from an old card, removed the background, and pasted it onto this Word document. Then they printed it out and photocopied it to hide the artifacts. It is a forgery, Francesca, and it is a sloppy one. I stared at the screen. The audacity of it took my breath away. Blair had not just lied. She had manufactured evidence. She had sat at a computer, likely with my mother hovering over her shoulder, and constructed a fraudulent legal document to steal $15,000 from me. But there is more, Harlan said. He pulled out 2 more sheets of paper. To make this affidavit valid, it requires witnesses. Look who signed here. I looked at the witness lines. Diane Lyons, Gordon Lyons. My hand flew to my mouth. My parents, I whispered. They signed a sworn statement attesting that they watched you sign this paper, Harlan said. They perjured themselves. They put their names on a felony to protect your sister's lie. I sank into the leather chair. I felt sick, physically, violently sick. I knew my family was dysfunctional. I knew they were greedy. I knew they were manipulative. But this was criminal. My father, who always talked about honor in the family name, had signed a fake document to help one daughter rob the other. My mother, who cried about how much she loved us both, had conspired to frame me. They chose her, I said, my voice breaking. They really chose her. They are willing to go to jail to save Blair. They are banking on you not noticing, Evan said, his voice hard with rage. Or they are banking on you being too scared to call them out on it because they are your parents. Harlan leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. That is exactly it, he said. This is their final power play. They are daring you to destroy them. They think you are still the little girl who wants to be liked. They think you will look at this forgery and back down, because proving it means accusing your mother and father of fraud in a court of law. He looked me dead in the eye. So the question is, Francesca, are you that little girl, or are you the woman who wants her money back? I looked at the forged signature. I looked at my parents' names scrawled next to it, the shaky script of my father, the looping cursive of my mother. Those signatures were not just ink. They were a declaration of war. They were a statement that in the Lyons family, I was acceptable collateral damage. I thought about Caleb. I thought about how he had looked in the coffee shop yesterday, broken by the realization that his life was a lie. If I backed down now, Blair would win. She would gaslight Caleb into staying. She would keep the money. She would tell everyone I was a liar who forged the texts. I stood up. The nausea was gone. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. What happens next? I asked. Harlan smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. If you give me the green light, I file a motion to dismiss their petition for mediation based on the submission of fraudulent evidence. I attach the forensic analysis of the signature, and then I file a formal complaint with the district attorney's office for forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. And Blair, I asked. Blair goes to prison, Harlan said, or at the very least. She faces felony charges that will destroy her credit, her reputation, and her ability to ever run a business again. Your parents will face charges as accomplices. This is the nuclear option. Francesca, once we push this button, there is no going back. I looked at Evan. He did not tell me what to do. He just nodded, a silent signal of absolute support. I walked to the window. I looked out at the city of Denver. Somewhere out there, in her expensive house in Maple Ridge, Blair was probably drinking wine, thinking she had outsmarted me. She thought she was untouchable. She thought the rules did not apply to her because she was Blair Kincaid, the golden child. She had underestimated me for 30 years. She had mistaken my silence for weakness and my generosity for stupidity. I turned back to Harlan. File it, I said. Harlan nodded and reached for his phone. And Harlan, I added. Yes. I want the demand letter updated. Updated how? He asked. Add the legal fees, I said, and add a line item for the forensic analysis. I want them to pay for the expert who proves they are liars. Harlan actually laughed. It was a short bark of approval. Consider it done. I sat back down as Harlan began barking orders to his paralegal over the intercom. The machine was in motion. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Caleb. I unlocked it. She is celebrating. The text read, She told Mom and Dad that she handled it. She says she found a document that proves the money was a gift. Fran, she is lying. I know she is lying. I checked the printer history in the home office. She printed something yesterday morning. I stared at the screen. Caleb was still in the house. He was watching them. He was my witness on the inside. I texted back, "Do not say anything. Just wait." "Wait for what?" he asked. "Wait for the knock on the door," I typed. I put the phone down. The file on Harlan's desk was thick. It contained the texts, the emails, the bank transfers, and now, the forgery. It was a complete dossier of a family's corruption. I felt a strange sense of peace. I had not sought this fight. I had tried to walk away. I had tried to just cut ties and leave quietly. But they had followed me. They had tried to drag me back into their web, and when I refused, they had tried to frame me. They had dug their own graves. I was just the one holding the shovel. Harlan hung up the phone. "The motion is being filed electronically as we speak," he said. "The courier is already en route to the district attorney with the evidence packet. By 5 o'clock today, Blair will be notified that her petition is under criminal investigation." "Thank you, Harlan," I said. He looked at me with a rare expression of softness. "You know, Francesca, in 20 years of family law, I have seen a lot of ugly things, but I have never seen a client handle this level of betrayal with this much dignity." "It is not dignity, Harlan," I said, picking up my purse. "It is logistics. When a system is corrupt, you do not try to fix it. You decommission it." I walked out of the office with Evan's hand in mine. The elevator ride down was silent. When we stepped out into the lobby, the afternoon sun was blinding. "Are you okay?" Evan asked. "No," I said honestly. "I am about to send my sister and parents to court on criminal charges. I am not okay, but I will be." I checked my watch. It was 1:30. The 72 hours were not even up yet, but for the Lyons family, time had just run out. The mediation room at Harlan Crow's office was designed to intimidate. It was a windowless chamber of polished mahogany and brushed steel, chilled to a temperature that kept everyone alert. On one side of the long table sat the Lyons family, my sister Blair, my parents Gordon and Diane, and Blair's attorney, a man named Mr. Sterling, who looked like he had not slept since he received our evidence packet. Next to them sat Caleb, positioned slightly apart, like a continent drifting away from the mainland. On the other side sat Harlan and me. The air was so thick with tension you could almost taste the ozone. My mother was clutching a handkerchief, her eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. My father was staring at a water pitcher as if it held the secrets of the universe. But Blair was still performing. She sat with her back straight, her chin raised, wearing a suit that was clearly new. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and defiance. Even now, facing felony charges, she could not drop the mask. "Let us begin," Mr. Sterling said, clearing his throat nervously. "We are here to discuss the misunderstandings regarding the financial assistance provided by Mrs. Kincaid to Mrs. Lyons." Harlan did not look up from his legal pad. "It is not assistance," he corrected calmly. "It is theft, and we are not here to discuss misunderstandings. We are here to discuss the terms of your client's surrender." Blair slammed her hand on the table. It was a sharp, violent sound. "I am not surrendering anything," she snapped. "This is harassment. I have the affidavit. I have the proof that Francesca gifted me that money. You cannot bully me just because you hired an expensive lawyer." She reached into her portfolio and pulled out the forged document. The gift affidavit dated February 3rd, 2020. She slid it across the table toward me. "Look at it, Francesca," she challenged. "That is your signature. You signed it. You just forgot because you are so obsessed with ruining my life." I looked at the paper. Seeing it in person was different than seeing the scan. It looked legitimate. If I did not know better, I might have doubted myself, but I knew better. I did not touch the paper. I just looked at Blair. "You really are going to commit to this lie?" I asked softly, "Even here, even now?" "It is the truth," Blair hissed. "Mom and Dad saw you sign it. Tell them, Mom." All eyes turned to my mother. She looked terrified. She looked at Blair. who was glaring at her with intensity, and then she looked at me. I saw the struggle in her eyes, the decades of habit, the instinct to protect the golden child. "Yes," my mother whispered, her voice trembling. "I remember. Francesca signed it at the kitchen table." My father nodded, though he refused to look up. "That is right. I was there." Harlan sighed. It was a sound of profound disappointment. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a large, high-resolution photograph. He placed it next to the affidavit. "Mrs. Lyons," Harlan said, addressing my mother, "do you recognize this sympathy card?" My mother squinted. That looks like the card Francesca sent when my mother passed away." "Correct," Harlan said. "It was sent in November of 2019, 3 months before this alleged affidavit was signed." Harlan placed a transparent overlay on top of the sympathy card. It showed my signature in bright red. Then, he moved the overlay onto the affidavit. The red signature aligned perfectly with the black ink on the legal document. Every curve, every pen stroke, every microscopic tremor of the hand was identical. "Signatures are like fingerprints. Mrs. Lyons," Harlan explained, his voice clinical. "No person signs their name exactly the same way twice. There are always variations in pressure, in angle, in speed. The probability of 2 signatures being geometrically identical down to the pixel is 1 in 3 billion. The room went silent, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. "This is a digital lift," Harlan continued. "Someone scanned the sympathy card, isolated the signature, and pasted it onto this affidavit. That is forgery in the 2nd degree, and by attesting to it, you and your husband have just committed perjury and conspiracy to defraud." Mr. Sterling, Blair's lawyer, went pale. He closed his file. "I was not aware of this," he muttered, distancing himself instantly. "I cannot represent a client who submits fabricated evidence." Blair looked around wildly. Her defense was crumbling, the walls of her castle turning to dust. "It is a coincidence," she shrieked. "It just looks similar. You cannot prove I did it." Then a voice spoke up from the end of the table. "Actually, I can—" It was Caleb. He had been so quiet, I had almost forgotten he was there. He stood up slowly. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I checked the printer logs in the home office," Caleb said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Sunday morning at 10:14. The file name was Scan 004 Fran Card, followed by Project Gift Draft Final." He threw the printout onto the table. It landed right in front of Blair. "Project Gift," Caleb said, shaking his head. "You named your crime Project Gift." Blair stared at the log. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at Caleb, her eyes pleading. "Caleb, baby, please. I did it for us. I did it to save the house." "Don't," Caleb said. He held up a hand. "Do not say you did it for us. You did it because you are a thief, and you dragged your parents into it because you are a coward." He turned to me. "I am sorry, Francesca," he said. "I am filing for divorce tomorrow, and I will testify to everything I found on that computer." My mother let out a sob. It was a low, mournful sound. Oh God, what have we done?" My father finally looked up. His face was gray. He looked like an old man. "Francesca," he croaked, We didn't want you to get hurt. We just wanted to help Blair. She was in trouble. You wanted to help her rob me." I said. The words were cold, hard stones. "You valued her comfort over my livelihood. You valued her lies over my truth. And you were willing to send me to court, to destroy my reputation, just to cover up her spending habits." I stood up. I felt 10 feet tall. "Harlan," I said, "please explain the options." Harlan intertwined his fingers. "Option A," he said. "We proceed with the criminal complaint. Given the evidence of forgery and the witness testimony from Mr. Kincaid, the district attorney will likely seek prison time. For all 3 of you, minimum sentence for forgery of this magnitude is 2 years. For conspiracy, add another 3. My mother wailed. My father put his head in his hands. Blair was staring at the table, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. Or, Harlan said, pausing for effect, option B. Blair's head snapped up. Option B is Francesca's offer, Harlan said, and frankly, it is more generous than any of you deserve. I walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. I did not want to look at them anymore. Here are the terms, I said, keeping my back to them. 1. You will sign a confession admitting that the affidavit was forged and that the $186,000 is a valid debt. 2. You will agree to a repayment plan. 20% of your wages will be garnished until the debt is paid in full. This includes Dad's pension and any alimony Blair receives. 3. You will issue a public retraction of all social media posts regarding me. You will tell the family the truth. And 4, I said, turning around to face them, this is the most important one. I looked at my parents. Then I looked at Blair. You will never contact me again. Not for birthdays, not for Christmas, not for emergencies. If you get sick, do not call me. If you lose the house, do not call me. If you sign this agreement, I will drop the criminal charges, but you lose a daughter and a sister, permanently. The silence in the room was absolute. My mother was weeping quietly. Francesca, please, you cannot mean that. We are family. I was family when you stole from me. I said, I was family when you gaslit me. I was family when you signed a fake document to frame me. You did not act like family then. You do not get to claim the title now. I pointed to the papers Harlan had prepared. Sign it, I said, or Harlan calls the police. You have 5 minutes. I sat down and watched them. It was pathetic, really. The great Lyons dynasty, reduced to 3 people scrambling for a pen to save themselves from jail. Blair signed first. She did not look at me. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. My father signed next. He looked defeated, a king whose kingdom had been revealed as a sham. My mother signed last. She looked at me one last time, her eyes pleading for a reprieve that was not coming. Francesca, she whispered. I did not answer. I took the signed documents. I handed them to Harlan. It is done, Harlan said. He checked the signatures. The garnishment orders will be filed tomorrow. I stood up. I felt light. The heavy coat of obligation I had worn for 30 years had finally slipped off my shoulders. I walked to the door. Evan was waiting for me in the hallway. Wait, Blair called out. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. What are you going to do now? She asked. Her voice was small, broken. You have no family left. I looked back at her. I saw a woman who was about to lose her husband, her reputation, and her fortune. I saw a woman who would spend the next decade paying me back every cent she had stolen. I smiled, and this time, it was a genuine smile. I have a husband who loves me for who I am, not what I can pay for. I said, I have 2 children who are learning that honesty matters, and I have $186,000 coming back to me. I opened the door. I have everything I need. Blair, for the first time in my life, I am rich. I walked out of the conference room and let the heavy door click shut behind me. It was the sound of a vault locking. Evan was standing there. He did not say a word. He just pulled me into a hug that felt like home. Did you get it? He asked into my hair. I pulled back and looked at him. I got it. I said, I got my life back. We walked out of the building together, hand in hand, stepping into the bright afternoon sun of Denver. The air smelled crisp and clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that felt sharper, sweeter. I checked my phone one last time. I deleted the blocked numbers. I deleted the group chats. I deleted the contacts for Mom, Dad, and Blair. There was no sadness. There was only the hum of the city and the quiet confidence of knowing that I had faced the monsters under my bed and evicted them. I was 30 years old. My bank account was about to be full. But more importantly, my soul was finally my own. And as we walked toward the car, ready to pick up our children and start the rest of our lives, I knew one thing for certain. The price of freedom is high, but it is worth every single penny. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know which country or city you are representing today. If you enjoyed Francesca's journey to justice, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story get recommended to more people who need to hear it. See you in the next video.